joining the Virtual Learning and You session. It's a session 1 of 3 on AAC implementation, and the title is Reducing Barriers. My name is Issa Kennedy, and I work with the AT and UDL as a service coordinator with the PSRTI Learning Connections project, and I am happy that you are all here. I just need to read a disclosure, and then we will get rolling with our content. So funding for this service is provided by the Bureau of Exceptional Student Education, the Florida Department of Education. The inclusion of technologies and/or services mentioned in this session should not be considered as an endorsement of any particular item, device, or program. The instructional appropriateness of any of the strategies or technologies mentioned must be determined at the local level. Okay. So today's objectives, we have 3 objectives for today. We have about an hour and a half together, and we do have some interactive activities. And we have one especially at the end that I'm certainly hoping we have enough time for. And we have plenty of time for you to give some feedback and ask questions. But our objectives are to identify 5 types of barriers to AAC implementation, explain the capacity building model for school-based teams, and explain strategies to improve AAC implementation in the school setting. So just to start off, to get everybody involved and thinking, when we talk about AAC implementation, of course, we want to have success, right? And we want AAC implementation to be successful for all of our students. So I would love for you to take a moment and think, and you can put it in the chat or you can raise your hand to unmute. Tell me what you think successful AAC implementation looks like to you. What does that look like? A device is used throughout the day. Generalized of the device outside of the therapy room, that is a great one. Using the device functionally. Oh, Marianne, I'm sorry you have no sound. Effective communication with the device. Student-centered and having buy-in from all team members is excellent. Very good. I'm just quickly taking a look at who we have here. So it looks like we have a lot of LATs and some SLPs. That's awesome.
Ria
Okay.
Owens has raised her hand to answer, so
Okay,
I'm
fabulous. Go ahead.
Hey, I think that successful AAC, especially in the schools, is ownership of the communication device, no matter what method that is, but having that ownership and being able to independently use it in the settings that it'll be most successful in throughout the school day.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I agree. Thank you for your input, everyone. So now that we've talked briefly and you've been great at contributing, and I really appreciate that because it's, gets boring just sitting here talking to a computer screen. So I appreciate your input. Now that we've determined kind of what successful AAC implementation may look like, we're going to launch a poll. And what we ask that you answer in the poll is, out of all of your AAC experience and the students that you've had in the past, and the students that you currently have, what percentage would you say have reached that successful implementation using AAC? Is it overall less than 5, maybe 10%, 25%, 75%? I'll give you a moment to answer that. Okay, we have about 75% of our folks who have been able to answer, so I appreciate that. So can we see the results? Okay, so it looks like only about 8% of you said less than 5% have had you've had students less than 5% of them that have had successful implementation. That's good. I was afraid the less than 5% was going to be a higher number. And it looks like we have the majority in that 25% range and a couple in 75% range, which is awesome. That's great, but we have nobody in the 100%, which I would expect, but we are going to continue to talk about how we can, grow that number. So we have more in that 75% and 100% range. So thank you everyone who participated in the poll. So talking about these things has helped us. So when we talk about what is successful implementation to you, keep that in the back of your mind as we move forward. And then the poll gave us a little information about where we can grow and continue to get better. It's kind of the results that I sort of expected, which is good. It lets us know that we're all on the same track, that we need to keep moving forward. So both of these activities give us the why of why this topic is so important. And our ultimate goal, of course, is to have all of our students be successfully communicating with their AAC. And success really meaning that, like our participant said, is able to take ownership of the device, that they can say what they want to say to whomever they want to say it, whenever they want to say it, right? And then that ultimately will lead to their academic success and mastering their educational standards, which of course is what we're all about in the school system as well. But first we have to get that communication working. So my goal is that by the end of today's session, you will leave with some strategies to help you move forward to helping your schools and helping the students that you serve have that successful AAC implementation. So the title of our session today is Breaking Down Barriers. So what is a barrier? The definition of a barrier is anything that obstructs progress or a limit or boundary of some kind or some kind of obstacle. So as we think about barriers to AAC implementation, what kind of things are coming to your mind? So you don't have to respond to this in the chat, but just think in your head, what kind of barriers are you thinking of? And is it something that you see if you're someone who serves multiple schools? Is it kind of the same thing you're seeing across, places that you go, across environments or schools or ages or that kind of thing? So just take a moment to think of that and keep that in your mind as we move forward. So specifically, when we talk about barriers to AAC, Buchelman and Light discuss that individuals of all ages who use AAC can encounter lots of supports in their AAC journey, we know, but they also can encounter barriers. And these barriers in particular can occur in policy, practice, attitude, knowledge, and skill. And they ultimately limit the opportunities for communication and participation for our AAC users. So specifically, if you're a LAPS and you're visiting schools and you're working with school-based teams, you're constantly assessing these opportunity barriers through your observations and when you're talking to school teams and students. So we are going to take a look at these barriers and then we can discuss how to plan for your support to help reduce some of these things that you may be seeing in the school setting. So looking at policy barriers, so in the school environment, we have laws and regulations that are in place to help support the rights of students with disabilities. And this will hopefully minimize policy barriers that you may come across with AAC users. We know that there is IDEA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and under that American with Disabilities Act is 504 students and assistive technology, and we have the Tech Act. So it's important that if you're on an AT team in your district that you're aware of all of these policies and ensure that they are upheld. And a lot of times it's the It's the AT folks and the people supporting assistive technology that are the advocates that bring these kinds of things to everyone's attention, right? Like not everyone always in a school building knows what these documents say about assistive technology, but it's important that if your area is in AT, which is why you're here, that you know what those are and that you focus on that. And you may be aware that recently the Federal Department of Education just a couple weeks ago released some documents called the Myths and Facts and a Dear Colleague letter about specifically assistive technology. So we may have some more information moving forward. We are still digesting all that information and seeing what it says, but it is kind of a good sign that federally that assistive technology is kind of a topic that is on, being talked about. So that is there as well. So those were policy barriers. And again, hopefully we have our things in place to help it. And then it's up to us to really advocate for those policy barriers. And the second kind of barrier are practice barriers. So many schools have practices in place that align with the policies that we mentioned in our previous slide for students with disabilities. This includes the inclusion of students with disabilities who rely on AAC in their general education programs with their peers without disabilities. And as students age, it's another thing to be thinking about when we talk about the policy barriers is students as they transition out and having something in place for them as they transition out. That's always been a hot topic as well. But again, our second barrier is our practice barrier. So one of the barriers can be the IEP team roles. So not one person should be the only person implementing AAC for a student in a school, right? And we know that we do see that sometimes, but it's not the way that it's supposed to be. The entire team needs to be involved in using the AAC and including the student in the educational activities. So that can be one of our practice barriers that we may see. Another one could be transitions through the school day. Sometimes our students with more complex disabilities have separate eating times, right? Where they go to the cafeteria when it's maybe quieter and other students aren't there, or because of different things that need to happen during the day, they're eating at a different time and not with their peers, or their arrival to the classroom or dismissal from the classroom isn't with their typical peers. And while there's safety reasons and sometimes there's medical issues and there's reasons that this happened, we also need to know that this doesn't allow for the opportunity for those social interactions to happen with our students, specifically who use AAC. So it's an important thing to try to minimize whenever possible. Another practice barrier is scheduling of services. Sometimes our students with disabilities, they get all of these services and we need to fit them into the day. But scheduling again during those free periods or recess or more social times during the day is going to limit when our student can interact with peers and really get to use their communication skills. Looking at the learning environment, again, sometimes we see students taken into separate rooms for therapies or different sorts of their education. And again, this is going to reduce their opportunity to have those communication interactions with their peers. And then transition practices. So does your district or the schools you're working in have job training and transition practices for our most complex communicators? That historically has been an issue, at least in my experiences. And again, as LATs and AT advocates, we need to really be the voice of making sure that when our students are transitioning to that later age and those later grades, that there is some sort of plan for them. So thinking about what practice barriers you've observed in your schools, again, just keep that in your head as we move forward. Have you seen some of these types of things, and what have you been able to do as a team maybe to reduce some of those barriers? Another one of the barriers that was mentioned on the slide was attitude barriers. And these are just barriers that can happen based on people's experiences, where they're coming from, just historically what maybe they know or don't know, and kind of what they think. So a lot of educators and families may question the effectiveness of AAC, right? Like, is it really going to help my child? Why are we doing this? I understand what they need. They're able to tell me in their own way, and I understand, like, why are we doing this? Also, educators and families may have reduced expectations of the student, right? So the student hasn't really had a lot of expectations put on them. So then maybe they have some of that learned helplessness. Maybe things have just been done for them. And therefore that there really hasn't been a lot of expectation put on the students. So therefore the adults working with them think, why they don't have a lot to say, or we don't need to teach them this, or what have you. And then educators and families, of course, we have that myth that still circulates even now, but they think it will reduce the verbal speech, or that the student will rely on the AAC device instead of learning verbal speech. And we know that research shows that that is not the case. But again, as a LATS and as an AT supporter in whatever role you're in, being the advocate for these barriers is very important. Knowledge barriers. So knowledge barriers really stem from the lack of information on the part of the communication partners, that minimizes the opportunity for communication by the person with the complex communication needs. So educators and school staff, including all those who come in contact with the AAC user, which could mean the bus driver, the office staff, the cafeteria staff, they likely have minimal experience in communicating with an AAC user. And as a result, that AAC user is going to face the barrier of lack of opportunities to communicate, right? So they may not, they may be talked, the adults may talk for them. They may not present opportunities for them to communicate, all of those things, right? So, and that's really a knowledge barrier that really hopefully can be fixed with some training and, and some increases in knowledge with our communication partners. Skill barriers, these occur when communication partners have difficulty with the actual interactions with the student using AAC. And research indicates that communication partners typically have difficulty accommodating to AAC users. They tend to dominate the interactions, right? Because no one really likes quiet time, or maybe, again, it might be a skill barrier along with an attitude barrier. So they don't have high expectations and they're not expecting the student to respond. They may take more turns and initiate most of the conversational topics. They may fail to recognize and respond to the communicative attempts of the AAC user. They don't allow time for the AAC user to respond. That's always a big one, especially AAC users that want to put some sentences together. That may take some time. But again, communication partners don't like silence, so they want to fill in the gaps. They want to guess what they're going to say, or they just don't give that user the time. And again, these barriers are reflections really of a lack of skills and training. So hopefully that through training and through education, we can break down some of these skill barriers for our students. So when we're supporting school-based teams and families in the implementation of AAC, it's important to identify what barriers are impacting the student's success to ensure that your support is targeting the need. I know I can speak from my experience as an AT support person in the schools. I saw all of these barriers. I didn't necessarily in my head classify them according to what we just talked about, but I do think that it's a good idea, especially if you really want to start targeting what your intervention is and how you're helping these teams, to really figure out, what exactly is the barrier for this student. So what we are going to do as a reflection is a little bit of an interactive activity. We are going to have a poll, and each poll has a question, and you're going to tell us, you're going to answer if it's a policy barrier, a skill barrier, a knowledge barrier, practice barrier, an attitude barrier, etc. So we are going to go ahead and launch that first question. Okay. So, which barrier is being described in the following situation? So, IDEA is not being implemented. Give it another second in case anyone else can answer. Okay, we have about 80% of people who answered. So can we go ahead and share those results? Okay, so 86% of the people said that it is a policy barrier, and that is correct. Not implementing an IEP would be, or IDEA is not being implemented, would be a policy barrier for sure. So thank you. So the second question is coming. Which barrier is being described? The IEP thinks that the student can't do it. So it would be the IEP team thinks that the student can't do it. That was my error. But the IEP team thinks the student just can't do it. Okay, we can go ahead and share those results. You guys are on it. That is an attitude barrier. That is correct. The third question is coming up. Okay, so the communication partner doesn't give the AAC user enough time to respond and instead answers for them. This one's kind of split. Give it another second. Okay, that is a skill barrier. So it's not a practice barrier, because the practice barrier would be more of like setting up the student's environment and their transition practices throughout the day and their scheduling of services and things like that. But having the communication partner's behavior would be more of a skill barrier for them. Okay. Which barrier is being described? The IEP team has not received any training on the use of the AAC device or how to implement it. the student just came to school with it and nobody knows what to do. Okay. That is clearly a knowledge, that's clearly a knowledge barrier. Yes, they have not been given any knowledge how to use the device. So that is definitely a knowledge barrier. All right, I think we have one more. Okay, so the student arrives at lunch 10 minutes before their peers and leaves 10 minutes before the end of lunch for transitioning to their next class. They're missing out on important social opportunities for communication. What kind of barrier is this? All right. We can go ahead and share those results. That is a practice barrier, 100%. Like we just said, it's the scheduling of the student's environment that will cause that barrier to happen. So that's definitely a practice barrier. Thank you so much for participating in that little poll to review our barriers. Some other information about barriers and AAC that I came across, and it's important to know, as you're visiting schools, if you're in a LATS role where you go out to various schools and you're supporting speech pathologists, the speech pathologist may be new to the field or may not have had adequate training in the area of AAC. And there has been a little bit of research that's been done on that, and an article published by the American Journal of Speech Language Pathology cited that they looked at about 530 speech pathologists who identified themselves as like general SLPs. So they didn't say that they were AAC experts. They were kind of just general school-based SLPs. But they reported that their lack of knowledge in AAC was definitely a barrier to them supporting their students. Their caseload size, which we know if you're an SLP is a chronic issue, and the use of time, that they didn't have enough time as the three primary barriers to AAC service provisions. So a lot of times the main AAC, implementation falls on that SLP, but it's important to know that SLPs are coming to the schools with all kinds of different backgrounds. And as a whole, they feel that those are the three primary things. So we can see that SLPs face the barriers as well. It's not just, teachers or maybe folks who haven't had that AAC training. It's folks who have had that AAC training. And there has been changes in pre-service education on AAC. Previously, not all graduate programs had to offer AAC, or if they offered it, it could be in combination with another course. So a student may have like one unit on AAC, not a whole class. So that has improved, but we can still see that folks are coming out of graduate school without much AAC experience. So we have to keep that in mind. So looking at a capacity building framework, we want to look at moving away, of course, from that expert model and moving into building the capacity and reducing all the barriers that we just talked about, to build school teams to take on this assistive technology and specifically AAC. So RESNA, which is an organization, it stands for the Rehabilitation Engineering Society of North America. And we have some LATs in the state who are considered, they're RESNA certified, and they've passed an exam on assistive technology as a whole. they look at all assistive technology, not just AAC, but AT in general as well. But they developed a position paper on capacity building in schools. And these are the key reasons why using the expert model, with having one assistive technology specialist evaluating students is not sufficient to keep up with the demand, and why we need to keep building capacity and breaking down barriers. So if we can build capacity within schools, we can increase access to AAC for all students, right? Because if more people know about it, then more kids are going to get it. Increase the knowledge and skills of the educators through training. Equip all IEP team members to take responsibility for the implementation of AAC, and reduce gaps in needs and services for AAC. And then we look at the World Health Organization Global Cooperation on Assistive Technology, another organization, and they have an initiative that identified 2 reasons for the gap between why are there so many kids that need AAC, and they don't have it. And they find that there is a shortage of trained personnel and a lack of an awareness at all levels. And that they found that the same gap is evident in school settings. So that they looked at this across settings, but they specifically looked at schools, and they found that the same thing is true. And it's for 3 main reasons. A lack of capacity to provide services through a dedicated AT specialist alone. Because we know that, like we just said, the AT specialist can't do it all. A lack of knowledge and skills on the part of the school professionals to identify those needs, and a lack of organizational structure and support. So these are all things that I think we've encountered, but just know that they are in the research, and through building capacity and breaking down these barriers, we can help to minimize this. So just a quick reflection, how can a capacity building framework help to reduce some of the barriers that we've talked about? So take a few minutes and think, maybe in your own work that you've done, how maybe your team or your district has worked to reduce barriers. And if anyone, I'm going to give you a couple minutes or a couple seconds to think about it. And then if anyone would like to unmute or put in the chat, I would appreciate it. So it's how can a capacity building framework help to reduce some of these barriers that we talked about?
Hi there, I can share if it's
That
time
would
to
be
do
great.
that. Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Denise, OT from Pasco County. And one thing that we have started to do here is really use other folks that are in our district. So we have these wonderful educational technology analysts, a department of professionals that some of their backgrounds are teachers, as well as administrators, and they're really helping to support those use of accessible tools for all in our district. So when our kids go on our apps, whether they're ESC 504 or general ed students, what tools can they use for speech to text, text to speech, shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts, different tools that are in our Microsoft free tools for some of our kiddos.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for sharing. I'm just looking at the chat too. We have a couple providing knowledge and training and tools, targeted training, training all team members. Yes, and we know that training can be difficult as well, because it takes time, right? So being creative about how you maybe train, and it's hard to get teachers out of classrooms and all of those obstacles, but I know a lot of people are very creative in getting that done. Making sure that upfront supports and services for each barrier provided. Excellent. Thank you. Helping school teams and IEP teams realize everyone's responsible. Yes. Thank you so much. All right. So we've talked about some of the barriers that are in the literature to as they connect to AAC users, and we've talked about why capacity building is so important. And now we're going to talk specifically about coaching. So again, coming from my own experience as an AT person who went out into the schools, I knew a lot about AAC and I knew a lot about AT in general. And I knew a little bit about education. Not a whole lot, but a little bit, enough. But no one ever trained me in like how to talk to people and how to talk to other adults. And personally, I've always been very good at managing little people and children, and I can go into a classroom and everything would be great. But managing other adults and peers is a whole different thing in my view. So I think that one of the areas that we don't get training on is how to do that. How, if you're a LATS and you're going into visiting classrooms, or you're anybody that's supporting a classroom and you walk in, how do you go in and consciously develop that coaching kind of relationship where you're not coming in again as the expert, because our idea is we want to build that capacity. So you're not going to come in with all the answers and do it for them and all of those things. How can you come in as a coach, as a mentor to help these school-based staff and these classroom-based staff and students be as successful as possible, especially when it comes to AAC. So that is what we are going to be talking about now. So when we talk about coaching, these are just some general overall tips to remember, kind of as an umbrella for your coaching process. And they can be really applied to any kind of collaboration or coaching that you may be having with a team. We're going to take a look at them in detail, but they are thinking of the long term, developing relationships, value of growth, managing expectations, and of course, overall, always being very supportive. So taking a look at thinking long term, so when you're starting maybe an AAC trial with a team, getting to know a new team that has a student with AAC needs, it's important to take that long-term view or take a long view of it and know that building up a team is going to take some time. And with the right conditions and supports, and strategies. So even if you're going in there with all of the right tools and everybody is on board and things are in alignment, it still can take a team about 6 to 8 weeks to really show competency as being an AAC supporter. So really learning those skills that we were talking about earlier of wait time and modeling and things like that. They're not going to get it right away. So it could take them up to 6 to 8 weeks to even understand and start practicing these kind of skills to support the AAC user. If there's any kind of history of failure or conditions that have made them feel less confident about AAC in the past, maybe some other situation that happened, it can take at least twice as long for these competent skills to maybe emerge in our school-based staff. So I think as coming from a visitor or a mentor coaching kind of view into a classroom, we have to keep this in mind that we might give them a lot of information and give them tools to work with, but it's going to take them a long time to start implementing those new tools. And giving them that pressure to hurry up or get it right is really not going to be helpful, and it's not going to accelerate the process of them becoming good AAC partners. So we are more likely effective by shielding those young AAC teams from using those kind of sentiments so that we take the pressure off of them and we watch them, help them grow in smaller steps over a longer length of time. So that is one view when you're going in, is to really think of the long term. Another one is to develop relationships. Know the team, the school-based team that you're dealing with. What is their history? Who knows who's been maybe had AAC experience and who has not? and do what you can to find solutions and strategies to meet each person where they're at. Also, as someone coming in, if you're the mentor going into the classroom, don't be afraid to be vulnerable, because AAC is very challenging, and it's perfectly okay and probably welcome if you talk about your own mistakes and shortcomings. Because I think sometimes teams think you're coming in as this AAC expert and you're going to know everything. And I think those of us that work in assistive technology know we never know everything, because it changes all the time, and we learn by trial and error too. So expressing to that team to develop that rapport and relationships that, they may be a beginner, but you're not perfect either. And voicing your own challenges can definitely help create an atmosphere that, you're there to support them. We're all in this together kind of feeling, rather than you're the expert coming in who knows everything. Another one is managing your expectations. So there's going to be a lot of missteps, of course, as you've probably encountered. Mistakes happen, but developing the ability to support AAC users is not seamless. And there is always that stance of we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Teachers leave the classroom, or the SLP changes, or the student goes to a new room, or all kinds of things happen all the time, right? Or the device breaks for a period of time and they don't have it. So just managing your expectations that everything is not going to go as perfectly as we would like, but we will make progress, again, if we take that long-term view like we talked about in the beginning of this section. Valuing growth and creating an atmosphere that values the growth, trying to suspend judgment, reward any risk taking. So maybe one of the folks in the classroom tries something new and it doesn't work out, but hey, they tried it. So rewarding that risk taking, that they're willing to get out there and try something. Celebrating baby steps and thinking in terms of short little inches and not milestones, right? We're going to make a little bit of progress at a time, while we're keeping that long view in mind, but we're going to celebrate those little steps that we make in a positive direction. Be an authentic cheerleader. So be generous with praise, and you don't want to give a lot of criticism. You want to shout out the good things that you're seeing, even when you might have to really stretch to see it sometimes, right? There's always something positive to see. There will be time for critiquing and correction, but especially in the beginning, if you're going into a classroom for the first time, or you're getting to know a team for the first time, they need your energy and your positivity to keep going. And using those praise sandwiches where you're going to use 1 or 2 or 3 positives with some maybe recommendations, and then follow it up with some positives, so that the team see what they are doing well, and make it clear that you see what they're doing and that you appreciate their progress. So again, keeping these things in mind of, when you're in your personal experiences, when you go into classrooms, are these things that you were already doing perhaps, or maybe there's a couple of them that you haven't thought of that you're going to integrate into your practice when you're going in to mentor these classrooms. So that was some overview, just, some ideas of how to keep positive and how to build those relationships when you're in that coaching or mentoring kind of position. But to take it a little bit further, I found a source with some really good questions. So sometimes, again, we go into these situations and teams are looking to us for all the answers, and we want to give them the answers, but we also want them to learn at the same time. So these questions may help you try to, make that model so that you're more of a coach and helping them guide them to their own answers instead of you just giving the answers. So these questions are taken from a book called The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Strainer. You may have heard of it before. It's a little book, but it has some great tools in it. And it talks about questioning that can, and again, it's adapted for school staff and specifically AAC implementation. So I kind of took them and tweaked them a little bit. So we're going to go through what these questions are, and we are at the end of this section. We're going to have a breakout room where you're going to get to kind of role play these questions. So keep that in mind. Of course, I'll give you the questions and directions and everything, but keep it in mind, and keep in mind of how, how you are when you go into classrooms. And do you have a set of questions you start with? Maybe you do already, and what those are, and maybe you don't. And these can be helpful for getting that, those relationships started. So there are 7 coaching questions that help guide this strategy. And again, there are a lot of educational coaching strategies out there. This is just one of them. And those 7 questions are listed on the slide. We're going to take a look at each one. So there is the kickstart question, the all question, the focus question, the foundation question, the relationship building question, the strategic question, and the learning question. So the kickstart question. So you'll notice that all of these strategies really focus on the growth of the professional person that you're working with. So while there are times when if you're a LAT, you'll need, of course, to provide that direct instruction and give them those direct answers. There is a time for that, but it is much more valuable to the person that you're working with if you can guide them to grow and come to conclusions and realizations on their own. So if you were going into a classroom, let's say for the first time, or maybe it's the second time, you've set up a trial with a student and you're going in to see how it's going, or they called you out for some assistance because they're struggling. These are some questions that might help you guide through the process. So this is the icebreaker question to get things started. Using one of these examples encourages the teacher or the school staff, or we'll call them the mentee, to get really to the heart of the matter and share what is important to them. So this could be, tell me what's on your mind, or where do you want to begin, or where is the most useful place for us to start? So what might be an example that you would hear from a teacher if you opened up with this question? Can someone give me an example in the chat, or you can unmute? Maybe something you actually experienced, or you can make something up. Oh, I like that. Okay, the student doesn't want to use it. Good. I don't know what the student knows. That's a great one, and definitely one that would come from a teacher, right? Because as teachers, they need to know what the student knows. Just so overwhelmed. How can I do all this? Okay, perfect. Okay, so that could be an answer that you get from your opening Kickstart question. So you can follow that up with it's called the all question. And the purpose of that is, and what else? And this is partly, they say, a self-management tool for you as the mentor, because they're going to come at you with what's wrong, and your reaction is likely going to be to try to help them, right? Like, okay, you want to know what he knows, or you're so overwhelmed, or whatever. So this is sort of a way for you to kind of take a step back and slow down in giving advice, and not jump into giving advice. And what the research shows and practice over these kind of coaching sessions is that the first answer is rarely their only answer, or is it their best answer? And a lot of times it's very broad, right? Like, I don't know what the student knows. Well, what do you mean you don't know what the student knows? Or, I'm so overwhelmed. So while engaging in this question, make sure that you stay attentive to what they're telling you. But you also need to know when it's time to move to the next question. So many times when we're helping schools implement AAC, there is more than one issue at hand. So this is the time to kind of get that out, right? So let's get all the issues out. So our next question could be what's called the focus question. So at this point in the process, people are talking to you about the challenges that they're facing with AAC implementation. And you might feel the need, again, to jump up and fix the problem or offer advice. So it's important that as a mentor, you stop yourself from doing this and move to the focus question, which helps identify what the real problem is, which is likely different than their original statement. Notice that this question is especially important because of that here for you piece. So what is the real challenge here for you? So by adding that, what they say is that you're honing in on the actual problem that the educator is facing, and you're making it personal to them and really showing concern about what is it that you need, instead of just, what's the challenge. So this makes it very personal. So I have an example of that. Like, I need to know what he knows about the lessons I'm teaching him, and I'm having difficulty. That could be an example of this kind of a thing. So you're kind of focusing in from that overall question into something very specific. Or it could be, we have a history lesson and I need to know if he knows these words. Or the device comes in on, it's not charged every day. That could be a general question. And then you work it into, specifics about why is the device not being charged every day, or things like that. So there's tons of issues we know when we go into these classrooms that people are having with AAC. So the next question is the foundation question. So this is where we start to narrow it down in the challenges into something very specific, where we can hopefully get a response or create a goal of what we're going to work on. So this is really getting into the nitty gritty. So this could be, what do you need? Or what do you need the student to do? Or it could be, something similar. But tell me more what exactly it is you need and what you need the student to be able to do. The relationship building question shows the educator that you are there for guidance and support. So like we talked about a few minutes ago, building those relationships is very important. So they may need additional professional learning opportunities. And maybe you can provide that to them, or you can tell them, oh, we have this, professional learning opportunity coming up. You should sign up for it. Or here's some resources I can share. Here's an online resource. Or maybe they need you to show them what to do. So maybe the problem is we try to model using the device and, it's not working, or we don't think we're doing it right. So maybe they need you to come in and provide that as guidance and as a model. So that they can see. Maybe they need your help in supporting and communicating with the parents. Or maybe they need your help with other folks in the school building, like the paraprofessionals or other teachers or that kind of thing. So this is the time to sort out, what is your role as the mentor going to be in this scenario? How are you going to help them? And again, it allows, instead of you saying, well, this is what I'm going to do, you're drawing it out of them with exactly what it is they're looking for assistance. The next question is, how can we get there? Okay, so we've identified a problem. We've talked about how I, as a coach or, as a district person, can come and help you. So this is where you're going to create like a plan of how that's going to happen. And using the word we creates that feeling of cohesion, and that the educator or whoever it is you're talking to is not alone. And you're not, again, giving them a whole bunch of stuff to do, and then you're going to leave and just expect them to be able to get it done. It really builds that cohesiveness of we are a group trying to get through this. So again, this question can be used as a springboard to create some kind of implementation plan, or write out a course of action. And remember, we're really looking for those baby steps, like we said, in those overall guiding factors, right? One of them was, we're not expecting to make all these great gains in this short amount of time. So really honing in on, okay, we've identified a problem, we've come up with a solution we want to try. How are we going to get there? And then the last section is the learning question. So ending with what was most useful for you creates a time to pause and reflect on the conversation and the interaction that the educator had and that you had, and maybe what they've learned from this interaction with you. This can help identify one big takeaway or one big thing that they need to work on. It can be particularly helpful during AAC implementation. After a coaching conversation, you can come up with agreed upon action steps to move forward. And it's more likely that the educators involved will remember and follow through since they have arrived at kind of these conclusions with your help, and you didn't come in and just tell them what it is they're supposed to do. So that is the kind of list of those questions. And of course, you can tweak them. You can use them if you think that they'd be useful for you. You don't have to, you can go through them in a way that works best for you. But they do come from that coaching book. And again, there are lots of other coaching strategies you may implement in addition to something like this. But it really helps to build that team capacity and helps with that overall, I'm not in here as an expert and we're going to work together. Does anyone have any questions or comments before we move on to our breakout activity? Okay, so we're gonna move on to breakout rooms. So what is going to happen is there'll probably be we have a good number of people on now, so there's probably going to be 4 people in a breakout room. You are going to get a document with the directions that you can you can have that in your breakout room, so you have the access to the questions. The name of the book is called The Coaching Habits. Let me put that in there. So what you're going to do is you are going to kind of role play what we just talked about. So there'll be 2 to 4 people in your room. One of you can be a coach and one of you can be or mentor, and one of you can be a mentee. So the mentee can be a teacher, a paraprofessional, a parent, whatever you decide. And then decide on a scenario. So it could be something that really happened to you. It could be, something that you made up, but really the mentee, who's the person being coached, is going to be kind of the one leading the answers to the questions. So they're so if they particularly have an issue they want to role play, that would be awesome. On your handout, you have the questions that starts with the kickstart question and goes all the way to the learning question. So if you have more than 2 people in your group, which you probably will, then you can halfway through switch roles so that everybody has an opportunity to be a mentor or a mentee. So we're going to give you 15 minutes to do this. Before we do any breakout rooms, does anyone have questions? In the chat, you have a link from Lauren to the document with the directions. Welcome back, everybody.
Hello.
Everyone is back.
I had a great coach. I'm just going to say.
Awesome. So would anyone like to share if that was useful, what the, pros and cons were? If you think that this is helpful for you when you go back into work in your schools?
I think it was really helpful because I feel as though sometimes, especially your teachers that you're trying to coach or mentor, they really just want to be heard. They really it's like that. I don't know. I feel like so often they're pouring into everybody else, but nobody's really pouring into them. And they feel like nobody's in their boat. They feel very isolated and alone. And so I feel like you coming in and kind of taking the more soft approach to okay, what are you going through? How are you? I'm checking in with you. What can I do to help you? I feel like it's putting that teacher first almost and really validating their emotion. And I just feel like that's really helpful helpful because they are the expert on that student in the classroom, and you're not coming in as an expert over them, but you're coming in at the same level as them, or even, trying to approach it more as a team. And so I think that's really helpful because you're putting that teacher's emotion first and they're feeling more heard instead of talked at.
Right. And them having one more thing, somebody telling them to do, right? Like this,
Right.
what's one more thing I have to add to my list? Excellent. Mia has her hand up.
Yeah. Hi, I just want to share because we're just finishing up. So my coach is Julie, and like she shared at the end, she had such great positive feedback worked in between the questions, which I loved, and it was very supportive. And the other thing that she shared, and I thought it was really great because she was so vulnerable, is she's like, I'm an SLP lead, so this AAC thing is completely new to me. But when we were going through the questions, she was vulnerable enough to say, you know what? She's like, I hear what you're saying, so what I'm thinking is, I'm going to connect you to our lab and, and maybe we can, get you connected to your OT and PT for my specific issue. And I just love the vulnerability of the fact that we don't have to know everything. We don't have to have the answer. We just need to know the people to contact or the resources to go to. And and she was like really nervous about doing the coaching thing, but I just wanted to say that she really handled it fantastically well. I loved her vulnerability and her positive feedback.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. There's some great comments in the chat. Anyone else want to share?
I can share. Hello.
Hi.
Our group, we had a great discussion, but it was interesting to see how we had an answer for the problem quite quickly, but forgot to ask a lot of questions to see if that teacher could actually do that, to see if that was something that was feasible in their day, given their lifestyle. And we even came to the point, like, did we even observe? Did we ask them some nice questions about what they do during that time? And it was really eye-opening to see how we had to break it down and break it down and break it down to get to where it was a good conversation for them to hear how we want to get to that ultimate goal.
Good, very good reflection. All right, so we are just wrapping up now, but just to kind of bring this all to a closure. So we talked about the barriers, some barriers to AAC that are we see, I think, just as, in our own life, and then is also validated by the research. And we talked about some overall coaching techniques and overall coaching philosophies to have. And then we kind of dialed down into more specifics about specific questions to ask. And through that collaboration of coaching, the goal and what we can get from it is really, like we have been talking about, is to help people come learn from their own experiences and kind of come to the conclusions on their own. It increases and it helps fulfill a person's potential. It lets them see that, you're not coming in again as another person to tell them what to do, that they can come to those conclusions with your guidance. This way of learning has a lasting impact because it's more meaningful. And it builds capacity, which is what we're all about, especially when it comes to assistive technology and AAC, right? We need to build that capacity because there are not enough of us out there to meet the needs of the students. And hopefully that will lead to successful AAC implementation, or at least help get the journey started to successful AAC implementation for a student. So just to revisit, hopefully we met our objectives. By identifying the 5 types of barriers, we explained capacity building, and we talked about strategies. And then you guys got to do some more of that on your own in your role playing and your small group. So it sounds like you had a lot of successful, really great conversations, which is really nice to hear. So just to summarize and end our day, I really do appreciate having you log on today and spend your time. I know everybody's time is very valuable. If you would please complete the survey. This is the QR code, and we will put the link in the chat if you would prefer to do it that way. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. We will be doing 2 more sessions focused on AAC. in March and in April. So please join us for those. These are being recorded and they will be posted. So if you wanted to share them or refer them to someone, you can certainly do that. Or if you aren't able to make the ones in the future, they will be available to you. And I am available as well, as are my colleagues, to Tara and Dana Lynn, to support you as we can. I'm going to leave this slide up a few more minutes. And if you have completed the survey and you don't have any questions, feel free to go on with the rest of your day. And thank you very much again for joining us today.